Thanks for the welcome. All right, so my talk is called Living at the Intersection of Art and Science. And I believe 20 years down the road, this is where designers are really going to be existing. And there's a few additional skills that they're going to need to possess in order to be successful, in order to live at that interaction point. So, future skills of a designer. So before we can start talking about the future, let's talk about today, just to provide some additional context. And as Tobias had mentioned, I teach an interdisciplinary UX course at Penn. So in that spirit, I just want to get a sense for who's in the audience today. So if you're a designer, can you raise your hand? Awesome. How about somebody who may have come from a psychology or research background? Cool. Anybody that's involved with software engineering or development? Okay. And then finally, anybody who is on the business side. So that could be a product owner, product manager, project manager. Very cool. So for those last two groups, even though we're talking about design, don't fall into the food coma just yet, because this still applies to you. Because I believe everybody is a designer, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. So, if we think about where we came from, a lot of us designers, we attended some sort of design school. And typically, those design schools live within a college of art and architecture. And what they teach us to do is really master the craft of design, creating great artifacts, beautiful artifacts that can communicate information very clearly and very immersively, too. And to master that craft, we were taught a lot about illustration, typesetting, and typography. And a lot of designers went on to go into advertising, information design. Some were designing maps and wayfinding devices. Really, designing is this big umbrella. And as the internet became popular, of course, in the 90s, some designers went all digital. So taking their skills and applying them to screen design. But as we know, we live in a very complex world today. And as devices have evolved, so have the designs. We're now thinking about designing transactional systems and more immersive experiences that can do a lot more than just display information. So now as designers, we have to think about usability, interaction models. We have to think about things like animation, and there's a whole litany of other things we have to start thinking about in addition to just simple layout. So that's where we are today. But actually, we're a little ahead of that. So I would say in recent years, we've taken this quantum leap. The work we're doing has increased in complexity. And as design thinking has increased in popularity, we're now applying design to ignite social change. We're applying design to business organizations, and we're redesigning orgs, we're designing services, things that are well beyond the scope of a simple screen layout. So this always made me wonder, the design school education that we have, is that sufficient? Are we armed with the right skills to be successful today? And more importantly, are we setting ourselves up for success tomorrow, 20 years down the road? So I'm going to cover a few skills that I believe we not only need today, but also need in the future to succeed. So the first, as a designer, I believe we need to have an understanding of research. So, what is research? I'm not suggesting we all run out and buy a lab coat and sit in a lab and go get our PhDs in science, but it is important to have an understanding of the scientific method. Because really, if you think about design thinking, it is the scientific method. And first, we need to have empathy. We need to understand our audience and who we're designing for. If we're working on these complex projects, we have to have an understanding of what are these people trying to accomplish? What are their different goals? And we have to have a good understanding of when they're trying to achieve a goal, where are they falling short? What challenges are they facing? Because these are things that can help us understand their mental model of the problem and how we can best design a solution that aligns with it so we can create something that's more natural. So at Penn, in our UX course, we're already teaching research, and we're encouraging designers to go out and do some research for all of their projects. In fact, they're required to show us how their design has been derived from the research and the requirements that they gathered out in the field. And I have to say, this is something I don't believe that happens in every design school. So why are we asking a designer to do research? Why don't we just let a researcher do research? Well, sure, the researcher is great doing research, but it's also important to have a designer present, because if this is a typical design process, there's this point in time where this magic happens, and that is as soon as we're taking the requirements that were gathered out in the field, and we have to do something with it. So if somebody very analytically minded is actually creating the initial parts of the design, it might result in better sameness. It always makes me think of the Henry Ford quote, right? If I would have asked them what they want, they would have said faster horses. But with his creativity, he had an understanding that people wanted to get from point A to point B faster. Instead of figuring out how to raise faster horses, he used his creativity to invent the assembly line and make the automobile more readily available in America. So, research. The next part of this is systems thinking. So what in the heck is that? It's not just a fun buzzword. It's actually the process of understanding how things regarded as systems influence one another within the whole. So thinking more holistically about a challenge. Now, what first comes to mind for me is the Internet of Things, and how we can leverage the Internet of Things to design some sort of experience in the future. And it's important to understand the different components that we have in our palette, whether it's a thermostat or a car, and combine these devices, if you will, in unique ways that allows us to leverage their core strengths and weaknesses to create some sort of system. But there's something more important we need to think about when we're talking about systems thinking. Systems thinking can help us understand the root of these complex problems that we're trying to solve with design. So a lot of times in the consulting world, we're brought in to redesign a simple system that might be all messed up. But it's not the system's fault. That system is the manifestation of a much larger problem. And if we can employ systems thinking, we can start to pinpoint where that problem is and help stakeholders and users understand the roots of the problem. And again, that will help us design a more meaningful and useful experience. So, I like this picture. In our class at Penn, I'm showing this because we're asking our students to use design to solve big problems. We're not asking them to design the next app that can let you log the beer that you're drinking at the party, right? We're asking them to apply design to challenges such as animal welfare and food distribution in Philly, because these larger challenges will help them to start to think this way. Okay, so this is probably one of my favorite pieces. Everybody is a designer. So I know many designers who might not love taking feedback from non-designers. Well, what does this person know? He's not a designer. Who is he to say that this isn't good? Well, the reality is that everybody is a designer. And first I'd like to take a look at an internal team structure. So those of you who might be recruiters or maybe in the market for a new job, there are tons of different titles that fit into the design world. And some people don't even know what these titles mean. Some of them are buzzwords, and it's all relative. So, you know, a visual designer to one company may be different than what a visual designer is to the next company. So it's just a mess. I truly believe it's all simply just design. So we have all these creative professionals. Some are a little more analytical in their thinking. Some may be more engineering oriented or technical. And then we might have people that fall into the creative bucket. So what can we do with this? Well, when we're creating a project team, why don't we pull the resources and combine them based on their strengths and weaknesses to create a team? But let's just consider everybody a designer. And they need to collaborate from end to end through the process to make something that works. Now, in addition to this, users are also designers. I truly believe this, and this may sound ridiculous to some people, but we can use participatory design exercises to include them into our creative process. So what's in it for the designer? Are we out of a job? Absolutely not. We are now the owners of the creative process, and it's up to us to encourage people and design exercises that empower users and other people to be creative with us and co-design the solution. So I always like this slide. I've shown a bunch of different lunch boxes here. And let's think about a quick scenario here. We're asked to design a new lunchbox for children in grade school, let's say ages 6 to 10. And this is going to be the coolest lunchbox ever. So we're all middle-aged adults here, maybe some people are in their late 20s. When was the last time you used a lunchbox? One that a child would be interested in, right? So who are we to understand what's cool? What is going to appeal to a child today? So instead of trying to make some assumptions, let's get a bunch of kids in a room and set up an exercise that allows them to build their dream lunchbox. So we have that idea of what is cool to them and what is exciting to them. So we design the exercise, they help us design the product in the end. And we can do this today in the consulting world as well. So we can use sketching and participatory design exercises, and we can ask users, how might we do this? How might we exercise? And it's up to them to sketch how they might complete a task in a system. And yeah, not everybody might be able to sketch the Mona Lisa, but seriously, if you can sketch boxes and arrows and write, then you can sketch. So some other examples of some exercises, we can use paper prototyping if we're thinking about 3D forms. We can even apply this to visual design as well and run some co-design sessions that allow users and stakeholders to apply a visual design to a system as well. So there's so many different opportunities for collaboration. And again, we also do this in our class at the University of Pennsylvania too. It's really important for the students not only to understand how to design, but how to empower others to design with them. So this is another favorite, and it kind of falls within that same vein. It's about storytelling, not tools. So you go into a job interview, a lot of companies will ask, well, what tools do you use? I always tell them Sharpies, Post-its, and sketch pads are my favorite tools. But really, it's about picking the best tool that's going to help you communicate your idea, especially when we're working on these very complex projects. So this is just a sampling of all the design tools that are so readily available today. And there's a lot more than this, and it's increasing exponentially. Design tools are also becoming easier to use. You have sites like Squarespace that are allowing people to design their own websites in a very intuitive and easy way. So again, what's really in it for the designer? Well, we own the process, and we have to encourage people to use these tools in a way that they can benefit from it. It's interesting, at the University of Pennsylvania, at least in our class, we're not actually teaching designers how to use tools, because who are we to know if these tools are even going to exist in 5 to 10 years? What tools are we going to be using in 20 years? It's about teaching designers to think, and think on their feet, and be creative, and do what they do best. The tools can always be learned, and tools are going to come and go, but pick the best tool that's going to help you communicate your idea. In addition to this, I always believe that the actual creative process is a set of decision points. So it's up to us to pick the best artifacts and ways of communicating our ideas throughout the life of a project, whether it's through sketching, prototyping, or a full visual design. But a lot of designers get really uptight when they invite people into their process. The old model was, let's do something awesome in a vacuum, and then we're going to have this big reveal moment, and hopefully everybody loves it. And that always fails miserably, well, at least 9 times out of 10. So letting people into our process is very important. So show sketches, show process work. But that also requires us to be excellent communicators and excellent writers too, because we need to use some of these other tools to help us communicate our ideas, especially when we're working in a lower fidelity. Now, notice through this whole talk, and I'm not going to harp on this much, but notice throughout this whole talk I didn't mention coding at all. And I think that's important. Coding is just another tool. So if it's something you have an awareness of, great. But all these design tools are starting to evolve too, and accomplishing things that we would have otherwise done in code. So let's not go down the rabbit hole of coding and try to be great coders. Let's try to be creative, think on our feet, and be able to communicate our ideas, because that's where we're going to win in the future. So I mentioned communication skills before, and I believe the presentation of your work is the design too. So you have to design the conversations you have with your client. You have to design the way you engage with them, whether it's through a workshop or whether it's picking the right artifact to show at any given time, and then thinking about how you want to engage them and taking feedback. So there's much more to design than just a layout. So these are some of my ideas for skills that we'll need in the future. But you could also say we need these skills today, and I definitely agree with that too. So just to wrap up here, thinking about research is very important, getting to know the audience, having this ability to think systematically, owning the design process and letting other people into it is important, and then also being able to communicate your idea in an effective way. So thank you guys. If you like the talk, feel free to follow me on Twitter. I also threw a hashtag up here. Definitely a very opinionated talk. This is a new presentation for me, so I'm also looking for feedback too. But thank you.